Hello and welcome to part 2 of episode 1 of Tea Time Trauma Talk with Brad. And that's me, and I've got a fresh hot cup of fucha tea. So that's been rocking all day long. This is probably my 4th cup. A little bit more energetic than the first time I talked to you. So you might be wondering why I'm doing a part 2 of an episode instead of just doing an episode 2. Well, quite frankly, I don't know. Still figuring this out as I go. I felt as though I couldn't finish the way I wanted to the first time. So I am going to recap and hopefully finish the way that I intended to the first time. And the video is now uploaded, but by the time you watch this, you probably would have already watched the first one. So there you go. All right. Well, I want to be honest with some stuff and the things that I've been able to work on for myself for the past 10 years. As I was uploading the video just a little while ago, I still had those nagging, persistent thoughts of this isn't good enough. What am I doing? This isn't right. This isn't good. This isn't good. This is bad. And I could feel my body tense up, and I could feel the sweat, and I'm getting those racing thoughts, and I'm thinking to myself, this is a really good example of how the brain and the body, they're not separate. They respond the same. What our body feels, our brain responds to, and what our brain does, our body responds to. And I don't mind being open with that stuff. I've worked hard on my own stuff and come a long way. And yeah, it's not nearly as big as it used to be. There may be a point in my life where I didn't upload. And there were definitely times in my life where I didn't do things that I really wanted to because of that fear and how it grips the body. And so that's just something that a lot of us deal with. And we don't maybe know where it comes from. But hoping that, in watching this, learning from this, learning from my mistakes, learning from my healing, that you can understand how you might respond to things, how others might respond to things, and that it'll be helpful. And that is, by and large, why I'm doing this. And as I mentioned the first time around, this is the time to do it. There is no better time to do it. We as a society are scared, and this is a good opportunity for us to unite as people. Instead of waiting for others to do something for us, we can do something for ourselves. And so this is my little part. Anyway, time for tea. So the first time I talked about primarily the development of children in the context of their attachment or caregiver relationships and how that influences and shapes their relationships with themselves, so intrapersonal relationships, and also the interpersonal relationships with others throughout life. If those things don't go, as I like to say, checked, challenged, and changed, how do we know what we're doing with others is healthy or unhealthy if we've never really been given that opportunity? So that theory, the development of the child, that theory is called attachment theory, which is what I was talking about last time, isn't by any means comprehensive. It's a very general and superficial explanation of attachment theory. And we'll go into that in a later episode because it is fundamental and fundamentally important to understand for yourself and others, whether you're a parent or soon to be parent, or want to be one day a parent, or you're a really great uncle like I am. Hint. Or we were all children at one point. And so that theory is really, really nice to understand the influence of our child development on our adult beings, our adult states of relationship. Some other things that I'd like to talk about throughout these episodes when it comes to traumatic stress is, well, for one thing, why call it traumatic stress and not trauma? Touched on that a little bit. If we focus on the word trauma, we focus more on the event of the trauma and not the response to the event, which is the traumatic stress. And therefore, if we focus on the traumatic stress and the response, we focus more on the individual and less on the event. And that gives not responsibility but power to the other person, or to the person, I should say, to change the response, because you can't do anything about the past event. Whatever happened 5 milliseconds ago is never coming back. What's going to happen in 5 milliseconds hasn't happened yet, but that's a story for another time. We can't do anything about the things that have happened to us, but we can do something about the way that we respond to them, even if it's 40, 50, 70 years later. We still have the ability to change our responses to those events. And that's why I personally focus on traumatic stress and not trauma. And the people that I work with and how I deal with it for myself is to focus on our efficacy and power, present day, and not focusing on the stories that we tell. You might see this, you might have heard of this, you see this in movies or TV shows or however it might be. We see people talking about their trauma. We've learned long ago that talk therapy, which used to be the primary therapy tool for this type of thing, isn't as effective as we once thought it was. It has a strong potential for re-traumatizing an individual, as opposed to letting the person's physiology heal and break free of it. Simply telling the story, re-exposing yourself to that time and again is not necessarily the answer. And thankfully there are lots of new practical and effective therapies for trauma that have been developed in the past 10, 20, 30 years that are far more beneficial than our historical approaches to trauma. And I will love to talk about that at a later time too. Not just therapy, but things that we can do just on a daily basis to help ourselves feel more engaged and safe in our own bodies, and therefore in our own relationships and communities. One of those things being yoga and meditation, or two of those things, yoga and meditation. And I do want to show you a couple self-soothing techniques by the end of this video. So hopefully I'll remember. Some other things that I would like to talk about, some things to look forward to, are other people in the field. I don't intend this to be simply Tea Time Trauma Talk with just me. It's with me, but not only me, and you might be thankful for that. So I would love to be able to get hooked up with some folks. If you're watching this and know someone who might be interested, please contact me. I'm leaving my email address at the bottom of the description, and it's a secure contact, a secure email. So there's that. I do have people in mind, but as I mentioned before, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to do that with the coronavirus challenges that we have these days. However, technology is wonderful, and or can be, and there's ways around that. So I'm really worried, really trying to figure that part out. And again, as you can tell, this is unscripted and unrehearsed. I'm just going to have that running as a banner across the bottom of the screen from this point forward. Theories of trauma. Well, we have one of my favorites is the polyvagal theory. That's something that I use in my practice. Not only how it is part of the traumatic response, but how we use that to heal in the traumatic response, or heal the traumatic response and move forward in our lives. Very powerful. I would also like to, let's see, I'm looking over at my bookshelf right now to give myself an idea of what I want to say next. Oh yeah, the different types, of course. When we think of trauma or we think of PTSD, we most often think of those individual moments in time where it shapes our life from that moment forward. And I mentioned those types of things before. So that's something we consider or we call shock trauma. So the increase in stress, or cortisol and adrenaline, the hormones that are associated with stress, are so significant in that one very moment that it changes our physiology, it changes our psychology, our cognitive perspectives, and so on. Well, that's shock trauma. So that's what most people know. Well, there's also developmental trauma, which is something that happens in childhood and predominantly within the first few years of life, when the core needs of a child are not met. Those core needs of connection and attunement and trust and autonomy, and the last one's love and sexuality. And when those aren't when those aren't met within the first 5 years or so, they have a direct influence, and they definitely shape how we interact with those needs later on in life. There is complex trauma, which many people do simply limit to the child. That, however, that's incorrect. We can apply complex trauma, which is what we call little t trauma. If we were to look at shock trauma, that one moment in time type of trauma, those are called big T traumas. And we can look at the more complex traumas where we experience those things on a chronic basis, little t traumas. And what it's like is a frog that's placed into it's kind of a grotesque example, but it's apropos, I suppose. Placing the frog into a cool pot of water, and then putting that pot of water on a stovetop and turning the heat up just a little tiny bit. Well, that water warms and it will eventually boil, and it boils the frog. And all that while, the frog doesn't realize that the water is actually getting hotter. And then suddenly it's ceased. It's an ex-frog, to paraphrase a Monty Python skit. It doesn't get, because the baseline for that has gone up and up and up, and its body has adjusted to that. As I mentioned in the previous episode, or the previous part 1, our homeostasis has changed along with that ever-increasing adversity. And suddenly we might, with a series of or little t traumas, reach the point of a big T trauma and have many of the same, if not all of the same, symptoms or experiences afterward of a big T trauma. And that's difficult for a lot of people to understand. And when I mention growing up in adversity, and I will talk at some point about the adverse childhood experiences, another concept that I use in my practice. But when we grow up in these environments and we become to develop core beliefs, yet another topic, core belief that we deserve this, that this is kind of our lot in life, and our nervous system is developed and primed for that type of environment, we later on in life end up in relationships that are physically abusive or sexually abusive or emotionally abusive and financially exploitative, whatever it might be. There's one person taking advantage of or exploiting the other person, and the other person so significantly wants to leave. At the core knows, remember, the heart center is untouched, and the heart center wants to be out of that relationship. And you might know someone who's going in and out of these relationships, or the same relationship, keep going back to the same relationship, and you wonder what's going on. It's a matter of this is where I go to feel at ease, for as unhealthy as that is. And that'll be a topic for later on, for sure. And so we're looking at trying to understand how trauma is more than just the nightmares, although that's a big part of it. I'm not going to downplay that. It's a very big part of it. It's more than just what's up here. I think one of the issues is we have thought about trauma as simply a brain disorder. It's not a disorder. We can call it a reorder. It's our bodies have been reordered according to the things that have happened so significantly that is how it is from that point forward. Until it's healed. And we process it the way that we can. But it is more than just what happens in the brain. It's what happens in every single cell in our body. And when we experience cortisol to that level, it does change our bodies, because all of that cortisol and adrenaline, that stress response, those stress response hormones that are supposed to be used to get our bodies out of the situation and into safety, that's not expelled in the moment. It's confined. One of the aspects of trauma is that we're confined. We are unable as children to leave. We can't just up and leave our attachment relationships, no matter what our age is. Well, we might really want to, but we can't. And then as adults, we are sometimes put into this similar situation where we are physically unable to leave, or we are emotionally unable to leave. Somehow we are unable to use the resources in our bodies that have been placed there in order to escape. And when those can't get out, they stay in our body, they're locked in our body, and every single cell in our body is affected by trauma. And trauma is at the heart of a lot of physical ailments, a lot of the things that drive us to the doctor are caused by trauma, traumatic stress. We look at autoimmune diseases, we look at inflammatory diseases, asthma or arthritis, those types of things where cortisol should be able to relieve the inflammation. So inflammatory issues, cortisol stops working properly, and the body starts to fight against itself. And one of the curious things about trauma is not just the body not being able to heal itself, but sometimes when we aren't able to, or we don't develop the skills to say no, saying no is a threat to either the attachment relationship or something to that extent, the body will start to fight itself, start to say no. As Gabor Mate says, the body will say no to itself. So that's another topic that I'd like to discuss on a different day. And of course, with all of this information, you're wondering, well, how the heck are we going to get to anything even close to healing? It sounds all doom and gloom. And yes, it does, until you realize that one thing that's changed can change again. And the brain is malleable. We used to think that the brain, after our third pruning process in the mid-20s, that the brain is concrete. Now, we know that's not true anymore, that the brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity is the idea, that's the term. The brain maintains its plasticity throughout life. And we've also found that neurogenesis continues on through life. So we are able to develop new brain cells, new neuronal cells throughout our life. And two of the most important areas that neurogenesis happens is the amygdala, so the center of our fear response, and also our hippocampus, which is our learning and memory. So if we can, change our responses to these past events, which are locked into this repeating cycle. They're not stuck. They're locked into this. There's motion in trauma, but it's just looping back on itself. It feels like it's stuck, but there is actually motion. We can learn new responses to past events and then no longer experience the memories and the feelings the way that we have. Memories and feelings don't go away, but the emotional connection and behavioral responses to those change. And that's the important thing. Some people would say, I wish I could just take a drug and wipe all this out. Well, yeah, that would be handy and sounds kind of dangerous. But when we desire to eliminate a part of our lives, we're desiring to eliminate a part of us. And one of the most important things in trauma is to understand that all of these things have kept you alive up to this point. Everyone dealing with traumatic stress, the aftermath of traumatic stress, if you want to use that phrase, they're still here because of that. That those things, those mechanisms, those responses have actually kept that individual alive. And one of the best ways to heal from this is to understand that those responses are you doing the best that you can. When you can show yourself compassion and understanding all of those parts of you that have tried so valiantly all of these years to keep you alive, they've done exactly what it is that they were designed to do. And they did so, and they were shaped by that moment. Even those nasty thoughts that come up and those that yell in your ear, and they just like what was happening when I was uploading to YouTube. And those thoughts that, hey, you're no good, this is good, this is bad, this is embarrassing, don't do this. They have only been shaped by past experience. They're only speaking the language that they know. Me from Minnesota, I will sound different than someone from Brooklyn, and we might even use different lingo. That's just because we were born in different areas and we were developed in different areas, and that's just the way that we speak. They're trying to tell you something in the only language that they know how. So that's where self-compassion comes in, just one aspect of where self-compassion comes into the healing process. And, well, it's getting kind of late. So what I'm going to do, because this takes some time, since we're on to the self-compassion and the healing part of it, I want to take some time to show you, and I might have to adjust my camera here a little bit. Hopefully it doesn't fall over. This is exciting stuff. Ooh, thrilling. Didn't really do anything. However, we're looking at something, a technique developed by Peter Levine, who invented or developed somatic experiencing, which is a wonderful trauma therapy. Since the body is so fundamental in all of this, and this is something that we have ignored, clinically have ignored for a very long time. There's more and more people, not to say that this is anything new, he's been at this for quite a long time, but he's focusing on how to heal the body, how to loosen all of this in our body, how to feel engaged in our bodies and feel safe in our body and feel confident in our body, so we can feel engaged, safe, and confident in the world. And it's really wonderful stuff. If you run into a clinician that does somatic experiencing, they're worthy of a conversation. Not to say that someone who doesn't do that or does something different isn't. However, I enjoy somatic experiencing, and I enjoy the work of Peter Levine. So take your right hand and place it underneath your left arm. And we're going to be putting the right under the left for a very specific reason, that the heart is over here. So we want to be able to, on that non-conscious level, feel that heartbeat. And we probably can through that heart. So this is important. That's why I like to put it over there. That's, I think, why Peter tells us to do it too. We'll take our left hand and we'll put it on top of our right arm. Not this. This is don't talk to me, don't touch me, get away from me. This is defensiveness. That's not what we're doing. We're layering the arms, left over right. And we're settling into this. And I'm just going to lean back a little bit. Okay. So, to us adults, this seems kind of silly. When I do this with children, they love it. And it usually works a lot faster for children than it does for adults. Children don't feel so goofy doing this. Even the young men that I work with, not so goofy. Whereas as adults, we're a little more self-conscious maybe, and we'll say this is just nonsense. But simply cross your arm, fold your arms, layer your arms, sit back, close your eyes. When we close our eyes and we disengage from our logical, concrete thought and the processes that told us to do this in the first place, and we allow the emotional parts of our brain to sink into the feeling. This is a nice feeling. This is a good way to fall asleep if you have issues sleeping, right? If you're feeling agitated at any time of the day, you can do this. You can do this while standing in a line at the grocery store. No one's going to know because you're simply doing this. When we do this and we sink into that feeling and it's nice, we start to feel as though someone is holding us and we're holding someone else. The layering is fooling the brain. It's that bilateral stimulation. You're fooling the brain into thinking that you're in this really nice hug. And the brain starts to release some calming hormones, and primarily is the oxytocin. We want that oxytocin. Oxytocin, we know, is that hormone that's involved with the child and parent bonding. It's very, very important in our bonding. It is the thing that, well, we know that oxytocin means love, but more so, it's safety. And love and safety are very important. To feel true, deep, authentic love, safety has to be there. And you can give yourself that by simply layering your arms, closing your eyes, and resting. It helps to do some diaphragmatic breathing. If you've never done diaphragmatic breathing before, that also feels a little weird at first, but it's like the treadmill example. It only feels weird for a little bit and then it doesn't. Using the diaphragm, which are the muscles below the lungs and in between the lungs, I should say, and the major organs, the gut, that when we flex down, that diaphragm pulls our lungs open and it draws air straight into our nose. We don't even have to try. Just flex that down and instantly the lungs fill up. The belly gets big, right? We as adults, we tend to breathe with our lungs. Of course we breathe with our lungs. We breathe with our chest, right? There's only so much you can do when it comes to the chest because you got your ribs in the way. So trying to breathe like this, right? You really shorten yourself. So breathing with the diaphragm, the gut moves out of the way and the lungs fill up, and then you press, relax. You relax the diaphragm, but then you also squeeze in those belly muscles. And you get those lungs all nice and squeezed out of the old air. So when you draw in the new breath, it's all new breath. None of it that's left behind is the old breath. So you're getting all the oxygen in. And you're breathing in with your nose. You can breathe out with your mouth or you can breathe out with your nose. But breathing in with the nose helps with getting more oxygen to the brain faster, so it doesn't have to go through the lungs and into the blood and then to the brain. It can go straight into the brain sometimes, right? Depending on how clean you are up there. So when people talk about breathing, how to do certain breathing techniques outside of the diaphragmatic breathing, we want to time our breathing since we don't have access to the heart when our heart rate is going up and we're starting to sweat. We can't just think, oh, heart, slow down. That's not how that works. Now, I'll get into it at a different episode. But we can access the heart rate or influence the heart rate with our lungs. So heart rate and our lungs are synced together. So every time that we inhale, our heart rate increases just a very small amount, and we have a very, very small amount of stress hormones pumped into our bodies. And every time that we breathe out, heart rate slows down just a little bit, and we have a little bit of calming hormone pumped into our bodies. So throughout life, inhale, outhale, exhale, not outhale. There's no such word as outhale. Your heart rate variability, right? This is how much flexibility, how much rigidity or flexibility there is in your heart rate. You want heart rate variability. You want your heart to be able to respond to what's happening, to not be rigid. Consistent traumatic stress or even shock trauma will influence the heart rate variability, will restrict the heart rate variability. So that's a very good way to know if you yourself or someone else has experienced traumatic stress, is to get your heart rate variability checked. And there are heart rate variability, HRV apps that you can use to one degree or another. They're paid or they're unpaid. Of course, you know how that works. So when we inhale, we're increasing our heart rate. So this is what I like to do. Some people say 4 square breathing is the way to go. 4 in, hold for 4, 4 out, hold for 4. I don't do that because I don't want someone to hold their breath when we don't know if holding your breath is part of the traumatic stress experience. So I do inhale for 4 and exhale for 6. Always do the exhale longer than your inhale. So it could be 7, it could be 8, whatever. 6 is a good number because if you do 4 in and 6 out, you have a 10-second segment of breath. And for every 10 seconds, you have 2 seconds longer of exhale, meaning you have 2 seconds longer of calming hormones and slower heart rate. If you do that 10-second segment 6 times, you've got yourself a minute. You've got 2 seconds longer each one. You've got 12 seconds longer per minute of calm than you do of stress. That sounds like a really, really good investment. Very, very easy to do. And you can do those two things together while you're doing this. And within a moment, usually within 30 seconds, but within 1 minute, you will feel your body begin to relax. And if the brain is worried about something, as long as it's not a semi coming at you or something like that, where there's actual perceived threat out here and your life is in danger, you want to be able to deal with that the way that it should be dealt with. But if your brain is wrapped up about coronavirus or finances or finding a new place to live or relationships or whatever it is, that signal in the brain is threat, threat, threat. Your body's going to respond. If the body responds with tension and it keeps tense, which a lot of us do, we keep tense throughout the day. We walk around like this and then all of a sudden we drop our shoulders and we realize that we have a neck. But when we realize that we're tense, we can drop our shoulders. We can do this. We can calm our body. And when we calm our body, it sends a signal back to the brain that, hey, I'm chill right now. And if the brain senses that the body is chilled, and the brain goes, well, there must not be a threat, even though the brain is responding to threat. And threat is threat to our brain, whether it's out here or simply in here, if it's a real situation that we're thinking about, or if it's one of the thousands, billions, and trillions of things that we worry about on a daily basis. All of the threat is a threat is a threat. So diaphragmatic breathing, 4 and 6, so that 10-second segment, and give yourself a nice hug. And that's it for today. This went on a little bit longer than I intended it to. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.